So welcome everybody to our October meeting of New Mexicans for Science and Reason. I'm Dave Thomas, the president. Our hardworking vice president, John Covan, is in the Zoom room. And tonight's speaker is David Weinberg, MD. And he'll be talking about curing all diseases again, trampling scientific boundaries for fun and profit. So, David, do you have like a PowerPoint or anything like that?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so I'm going to
share my
anoint you
screen.
with the special speaker oil, and it is done.
Okay, let me see if I can make this work.
Oh, so yeah, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Let me. Can you still see me and hear me?
It's looking good. Curing all
Okay.
diseases again.
Okay. So my name's David Weinberg. I just recently relocated to New Mexico from Wisconsin. So I'm still kind of in unload, unpacking, moving purgatory. But happy to be here. Part of the move was that I recently retired from my career. I was an academic physician, ophthalmologist, and retina specialist. Recently, post-retirement, have settled here with my wife, and a great deal of her family is here as well. I'm really, really happy that there's a group like this here, a local group interested in science. I really didn't have a organized group like that where I came from, so I'm quite thankful to have a group like that. This talk has kind of been a long time in the making, and this is actually the first time I've given it publicly. Consider this informal. Feel free to interrupt me. I'm open to any constructive feedback or deconstructive feedback at the end or in the course of the presentation. So feel free to stop me if there's a question. Any questions before I start about me or my move or my career?
No, I think we're ready to go.
All right, so I will get started. This is kind of a story in two chapters. And these stories occurred in different times, in different places, with different people. And I learned of these stories at different times through disparate routes. And you could think they're completely non-connected stories, but I think there are themes that connect these stories that maybe can teach us something. And in researching this, it reminded me of this quote, which is frequently probably misattributed to Mark Twain. It says, "History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes." So this is the first chapter of the story, the 19th century chapter. And the context for this chapter is the evolving germ theory of disease. In the latter to mid part of the 19th century, many of the seminal discoveries that kind of cemented germ theory's established science took place. And despite the great explanatory powers of germ theory, really the cures and the promises of germ theory didn't occur till over 40 years later with the discovery of antibiotics. But I'm sure you all remember this point in time in 1886 when a gardener in Austin, Texas cured all diseases. So this is the hero of our story. His name is William Radham. William Radham was a gardener in Austin, Texas. He wasn't a scientist or a physician or a microbiologist, not with formal training, but he was kind of a fan of science, and he was a super fan of germ theory. And he was able to speak fairly credibly on it. He could talk the talk. He wrote a book. And his gift to the world was his microbe killer. It was patented in 1886. And it was a tremendous commercial success. I'll delve into that a little bit later. I know about this. The way I learned about this was through my hobby of connecting antique medical artifacts. These are just a few of the bottles from this era that I have in my collection. And suffice it to say that Mr. Radham wasn't the only snake oil salesman of his era, but he was one of the most successful. And the way I came to know of Mr. Radham was through this bottle. This is sort of one of the must-have bottles for collectors. And I was drawn to it because of the image and the embossing on the bottle. It's a little hard to read, to project, but here's a print. The print version is on the right side. So he called his cure the microbe killer. And he had the humble tagline, cures all diseases. And his trademark was this image of a suited hero in Mortal Kombat with a Grim Reaper depicted as a skeleton. And he had great commercial success with this product. He was able to move from his humble beginnings in Austin, Texas, to a mansion on Park Avenue, and his business was successful for 30 years and persisted beyond his death when it was run by his wife. And this truly was the Wild West at the time he was in business. There was no FDA, there was no regulation of drugs, and he and some of his ilk did gain the attention of the regulators. And in 1906, the first attempt to regulate medicines was the Pure Food and Drug Act. It was a pretty impotent law, and it was supplemented in 1912 with the Shirley Amendment. And what this amendment did was it prohibited false therapeutic claims. And the microbe killer was one of the first targets of the Shirley Amendment, and they pretty much confiscated his supply and put him out of business. But after 30 years, that was after 30 years of successful business. And even in 1913, when he was put out of business, real antibiotics wouldn't be discovered for another 15 years. So now to the 21st century version of this story. In the context, this is present day, and this is the context. This is the emergence of stem cell science. Now, stem cells weren't new in this century, but there were some really important discoveries that took part at the beginning of this century that led to better understanding of stem cells and scientists better able to manipulate stem cells in ways that really created the potential for treatments from stem cells. And this was really accompanied with a great deal of hype and potential. This was the fountain of youth. It was the cure to all diseases. And almost every periodical had a cover like this and deep, hype, very breathless endorsement of stem cell science, how it could save your life. This was a cover of Time magazine, I believe from 2009. And as I said, there were many of these in circulation at the time. And despite the great promise and despite the tremendous hype of stem cell science, really the cures have mostly yet to come. The science is progressing, but it's been slower than we had hoped. But that hasn't stopped this large industry of direct-to-consumer stem cell treatments. And these continue and market directly to consumers, and they promote a variety of treatments really based on pretty flimsy data. And I was kind of aware of this in the background, but this really came to my attention in 2017. And that was when this article was published. And this is published in the very prestigious New England Journal of Medicine. And it describes 3 patients with a condition called age-related macular degeneration that sought treatment at a stem cell treatment, received treatment, and all 3 of these women very rapidly suffered severe vision loss and all ended up legally blind within a couple weeks. And these weren't the only 3 cases. These were the first 3 to be reported, but there were several others that followed. These 3 patients in particular were treated at this facility in Florida called US Stem Cell. They build themselves. This is a screenshot from their website that I took at about the time of these events. They build themselves as world leaders in research and development of stem cell and regenerative medicine treatments. The chief scientific officer at the time was this woman named Kristen Comella. Much like Mr. Radham, she really didn't have formal training in medicine or biology. She actually had a degree in her degree was in an engineering degree of some sort. I don't recall which. She had a master's in engineering. But she was really kind of a superstar in the regenerative medicine industry. And she really was a very articulate and very enthusiastic evangelist for stem cell science in particular, in general, and the stem cells from US Stem Cell in particular. And like I said, she was very much the face and the voice of this company. And you just harvesting information I got from the internet and from talks she gave. This is a partial list of the conditions that she felt were appropriate or she had either treated or had success in treating with stem cells. Um, a pretty large list of sometimes pretty tragic diseases. And her quote on this was from an interview that I listened to. Any organ or tissue inside the body that needs healing essentially could be treated with stem cells. And you could kind of hear Mr. Radham whispering through the centuries to her, a little pithier quote. So what exactly was the treatment these women received? Well, there were two components to the treatment that they received. One was called stromal vascular fraction, and the other was called platelet-rich plasma. So what happened to these women, they went into this clinic. The stromal vascular fraction was derived from liposuction. So these women underwent a liposuction procedure, and they harvested belly fat. They basically insert a big needle into the subcutaneous tissue and suck out fat and a variety of other tissues. It's processed in a variety of ways, chemically and mechanically. It's centrifuged down, and they take a pellet of stuff that falls at the bottom of the tube. And this is where the putative stem cells reside. They also take something called platelet-rich plasma, which is a component of blood. They draw whole blood from the patient, spin it down, and take one fraction from the blood. They mix those two things together, and then they injected that into the organ of interest, and in this case, the patient's eyes. Don't get the idea that these are two real discrete ingredients. These are both biological tissues, and they're composed of all kinds of different cells, proteins, growth factors, in addition to the reagents they use to process these tissues, and they're not really well characterized what they actually inject. But they took these, they draw them up in a syringe, and they inject them into the target organ. In this case, they are injected into the inside of the eye. Now, this kind of injection of medications in the eye is a frequently used procedure. I did thousands of these injections with well-studied, well-proven medications. But unfortunately, this was not a well-studied, proven medication. And what they probably didn't know is the eye can be very unforgiving to injecting the wrong thing in the wrong place at the wrong time. And without going into a lot of detail about what these all mean, suffice it to say, these women underwent a spiral of severe complications. Despite seeking treatment at some of the top medical centers in the country, all three of these women ended up legally blind at the end of the process, generally within a couple of weeks. And just to put things into context, these women started off, they had macular degeneration, but they started off with pretty good vision. Every one of them would have qualified for a driver's license in their home state. And a couple of weeks later, they were legally blind as a result of this treatment they received. And the worst patient ended up without perception of light, what we call no light perception in both eyes. So she lost all ability to see anything at all in both eyes. So these are really tragic outcomes. So you might ask, who's responsible for overseeing these clinics and what happened? Well, the FDA has some role in overseeing medical treatments and new medications, but for these types of treatments, and they do have regulations and guidelines about use of biological tissues in medicine, but the way the regulations are written, they're pretty ambiguous. And clinics like this interpret these regulations in a way that they declare themselves exempt from regulation. And for the most part, the FDA has been pretty hands-off in going to these clinics and doing hands-on regulation. However, in this case, they did make an exception, probably because of all the bad publicity from these patients. So in April of 2017, they did a surprise inspection of US stem cell. They showed up unannounced. In August of that year, they issued a warning letter, and what they declared was that that the treatments that this company was providing were not exempt from regulation, and the fact that they classified them as drugs. They cited them for numerous violations, issued a warning letter, which is about as severe as the FDA gets. And US Stem Cell was defiant. They just continued to declare that they were exempt. They continued to fight the FDA in court. And finally, it took another year, but the FDA went to court and filed legal action against US Stem Cell in courts. And finally, a year later, a judge upheld the FDA's action against US Stem Cell, and then they're sort of forced to stop their processes. At least stop. The company still exists. They no longer do this kind of treatment. So what went wrong? I kind of put this all into the category of lack of adult supervision. US Stem Cell, as I said, their chief scientific officer really had no formal training in biology or medicine. I looked through their board of directors. I tried to see if they had any advisors that had any expertise in ocular anatomy, physiology, toxicology, pharmacology. And as far as I can tell, they didn't. And if they consulted somebody, they got bad advice. So what went wrong? I think there was lack of regulatory accountability. I think that goes a little bit both ways, both with the FDA and with the company.
Has tort lawsuits been filed?
Yes, I believe all three of these women and more have won, not just filed, but won lawsuits against this company.
What's
Good
the
question.
outcome so far?
Well, you mean what are the awards? They're sealed. We don't know.
Oh, okay.
As far as I haven't looked into it recently, but I believe they are sealed.
All right, thanks.
They did, as far as I can tell, they did no preclinical research. Generally, if you're going to institute a new treatment in a new organ for a new disease, you do some preclinical research. They did no safety studies. They went directly to a fee-for-service model. And if you've studied anything about how these clinical trials are done, you would never inject both eyes of the same patient with a brand new treatment, but they chose to treat both eyes at the same time. And I think all these things really led to these really tragic outcomes. And with all the things I said, there's a high plausibility for harm in this case, not just because of all the things that they didn't do, but there was affirmative evidence that this was a dangerous thing to do that existed. If you just do a Google search, remember one of the components of their treatment was called platelet-rich plasma. I did a very quick Google search. I was a little bit familiar with this research from stuff I had done in the past, but this came up, intravitreal and subretinal proliferation induced by platelet-rich plasma. This was in an animal model with rabbits, but these rabbits basically behaved about the same way that these patients did. And this was research that was done in the 90s. Same thing in pigs, in research in pigs. So somebody should have known, somebody should have looked, somebody should have known that this was a bad idea. Even with this data, even without this data, there should have been some preclinical studies done. So back to our timeline. At the time these patients were treated in 2016, there was a published report that they scraped the internet. They determined there were about 570 direct-to-consumer stem cell clinics in the USA. They did the same thing again in 2021. And bear in mind, this is after the FDA cracked down on this clinic. At that time, there were 2,754 direct-to-consumer stem cell clinics in the USA. So I believe it's almost quadruple the number. So the FDA hasn't had much of a chilling effect on the activity of these clinics. So again, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And what do these two stories have in common? Well, I think there's an emerging science, and it really does capture the imagination of the public. There's a great deal of hype around these sciences, and people get impatient. And the science just can't keep up. Science is slow and it can't keep up with expectations. And there's always a few people that represent themselves as the vanguard of science, and they make claims that are seductive but exceed contemporary evidence. And the regulators just aren't prepared, and they struggle to keep pace in the new frontier. And unfortunately, sometimes patients get harmed. So I've written about these events in quite a bit more detail. I don't know if you're familiar, there's a website called Science-Based Medicine, and almost every day there's an article of interest. I wrote 3 articles on this activity, this US stem cell clinic. there. You can, if you just go to US Stem Cell and search my name, you can find it. I also wrote kind of what became the genesis of this talk for the Skeptic, the UK Skeptic online magazine, where I tied together the Radham's story and the US Stem Cell story. And I thank you for your attention. If you're interested in some good sources of information about stem cells, there's an organization called the International Society for Stem Cell Research. They have very good patient resources that are science-based and based in reality. Very good resource. If you're a little more science research oriented, there's a research at UC Davis School of Medicine named Paul Knopfler. He's a researcher. He's an extremely vocal advocate for responsible use of stem cells, both in research and in clinic. He has a weekly newsletter called The Niche. All you have to do is go to the website and enter your email, and you can subscribe to the newsletter. It really keeps me up to date on the latest issues in kind of this really rapidly emerging field. And I'm happy to answer any questions, or if anybody wants to contact me, this is my email address. Thank you very much.
All righty, thanks. That was a stirring presentation. I hadn't realized the stem cell research was so advanced in its ability to bypass scientific protocols and sell crap to consumers.
Yeah. I mean, it's likely that if you're probably in your spam mailbox or your email and the circulars in your newspaper, there's probably some local clinic that's largely they deal with orthopedic stuff. That's kind of their biggest target, but they claim cures for just about everything. It used to be you had to leave the United States to find clinics like this, but that's not true anymore.
As a follow-up to my question about tort lawsuits, as something that might dampen this over enthusiasm, what about the attack of lack of professionalism in people in not regulated, but anyway, for example, medical boards? Have any people associated with that had their medical license canceled, or
it's very rare for any medical board to take away somebody's medical license. It does happen rarely. Unfortunately, none of the people involved in this were doctors or physicians.
or qualified for sure?
There was a physician, I didn't go into this. There was a physician that put her name because they were doing an invasive procedure, so they had to have somebody to do that. And they found a woman who was a licensed ophthalmologist. She had no background in research or in retinal diseases at all, but I think she was the one that actually did at least some of the injections. I'm not aware that she was sanctioned in any way by a medical board. There's it's a very different model, but there's another group in Florida of physicians they are calling research on stem cells. It's really questionable. It's very poor research. It's very unethical research in a lot of people's opinion. But they're basically doing fee-for-service research. You pay to be in the clinical trial. You pay thousands and thousands of dollars. They say it's research. But it's basically just, to me, it's just it's just a veneer for unregulated research, unregulated treatment. And one of those physicians didn't lose his license, as far as I know, but the American Academy of Ophthalmology did strip him of his membership. It's a symbolic thing, really. It's the biggest professional organization of ophthalmologists, and he lost his membership in that. But he's still licensed to practice medicine in Florida. And his partner actually had lost his license for other reasons many years ago. But the partner is not involved in the actual patient care part, so he can still be part of the team.
David?
Yes.
Can you stop your sharing? We'd be able to see everybody better.
Oh, sure. Let me remember how to do that.
Just there's a stop share button, should be.
Got it. Okay.
There you go. Super. So I just
So
recently had
have
a
a question.
oh,
I have a question. This is Jim. My interest is in how people who are candidates for treatment, how they assess the risks of a particular treatment. Because if you look at how people make decisions, they don't make them usually in a logical manner. They weigh, they have different weights to different kinds of source material, recommendations. I used to live in Eugene, Oregon, and there's a guy, Paul Slovic from Decision Research. And he looked at how people come to make decisions such as using information that is more salient. So for an example, maybe a doctor might give some pros and cons to a particular treatment, but the person who is the recipient might have a friend or a family member who they really trust. And so that person gives them advice and they weigh that maybe more strongly than people in the field. And in this case, it sounds like the people in the field also didn't have sufficient background to give informed, information that was reliable. So in your background, and maybe this doesn't, I don't know if you can comment on this though. In your background, how do people, what's the challenge between giving people enough information so they can make an informed consent about risky procedures versus simply making it such that it's not time to even give them those options because the research is not there yet. Does that make sense?
That's a lot of different questions. And it's complicated. Every patient comes in with different background information. You can give, I mean, you try to give patients objective information, and patients don't always think logically. They hear things that you don't say. They focus on things that they think are important that you are obligated to tell them, but are much less important. You do your best to try to inform them. They come with a lot of information. A lot of it can be good. A lot of it's really bad. And they have all that stuff in their head, and they make their decisions. And I'm not always certain of what actually brings them to that decision. And in this case, I'd be really curious to know what they were told before they got these particular patients, what they were told before they got this procedure. If there was an informed consent, I'd be really curious to see it. One of the layers here that I didn't talk about, this company went under a different name before they became US Stem Cell, and they had actually registered a clinical trial to treat macular degeneration with this treatment on a website called clinicaltrials.gov. And clinicaltrials.gov is a website, and it's just a registry. It has no oversight by the government. It is sponsored by the government, but it has no regulatory, nobody reviews these protocols. It was set up so that clinical trials would be registered so that people couldn't do these kind of secret clinical trials and then bury the results if they were unfavorable. Drug companies were accused, and it was true, they would do a clinical trial, and if it was unfavorable, it would never see the light of day. And this way, they would at least have to register it, and there would be some accountability. And a lot of journals will now require, before they'll publish a clinical trial, it has to have been registered in a registry. But a lot of people attach that registry with some credibility, and it doesn't give any credibility at all. It just means they registered their study. They never did the study. They enrolled 0 patients in that study, but it also becomes a marketing tool because patients find out about clinical trials through that study. So it's alleged that some of the patients contacted US Stem Cell because of this clinical trial registry, and some of them actually believed that they were in a clinical trial and they were not. Whether that was just misunderstanding on their part, or if there was some complicity in that with the company, I have no idea.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that we expect, or we fear sometimes, that people will, without much background in how to assess studies, will not look at the background to a study, as in how many people were subject to the study, and they can't assess the validity of the study.
And you know,
And
you
yet,
can't expect
they
them to be
make
able to.
decisions.
Yeah.
Pardon?
I mean, you can't expect them to be able to. It's really, if I'm looking at a study that's outside my field, I can't really judge it very well either. So it's not, I don't think the patient should be expected to be able to do that. The studies have gotten more and more complex. The statistics are harder and harder to understand. And one study is rarely sufficient to really definitively answer a question. So it's really complicated.
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
My name is Robert Bennett. I'm a nurse practitioner. I haven't been to an NMSR meeting since before the pandemic. Glad to be back. One question is stupid. I missed the first minute of this meeting, and if you could just super briefly repeat your background, what specialty you are and who you're with. My second question is something I've been terribly interested in for a long time, but maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I did a preliminary but very, very short inquiry on the web and with the FDA to find out what is the FDA's process in terms of evaluating medical devices and such, because I know that sometimes there's quite sophisticated work done to see if something's effective. But my impression is that most medical devices that are put on the market don't get that kind of evaluation, but instead the FDA just requires manufacturers to show that they've been proven safe without any concern at all for whether they're effective or not. So that when we all see something advertised saying FDA approved, I think the vast majority of people think, oh, the FDA has found this to be effective. But I believe that's not the case, and it's only that the FDA has found it not to be particularly harmful. Can you talk about that a little bit? And also how to find out when something is marketed and we have questions about it, how we can find out whether it's been shown to be effective by the FDA or only shown to not harm us. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. Well, first, my background, I was an academic physician, ophthalmologist and retina specialist. Most recently, I was in the full-time faculty at the Medical College of Wisconsin. I recently retired. I'm still on the emeritus faculty from there, but recently retired to New Mexico. As far as devices are really complicated, and I don't have a great deal of expertise in FDA's regulation of devices. There are different devices that undergo different levels of scrutiny. If a device has a very specific indication for a specific condition, I believe it has to go through pretty rigorous safety and efficacy testing. If it's a less specific device like a surgical clamp or something like that, it probably just has to be shown to be either equivalent to an existing device or be safe and be made of materials that are inert. And there's different levels for devices, and I really don't, like I said, I don't have a great deal of expertise in that area. For medications, if a medication, you have to be careful of what they say in the ads too. If they say it's been evaluated by the FDA, that means almost nothing. If they say if a medicine has been approved by the FDA, that does have a pretty specific meaning that it has been proven to the FDA's satisfaction of safe and efficacious for a specific disease indication.
Yeah, I'm thinking more of
But
devices.
again, you have to be careful about what exactly they say. If just because it says FDA somewhere in the fine print doesn't mean much.
Well, a lot of the devices I'm thinking of are um, by practitioners who indulge in quackery in general, by naturopaths, chiropractors. So a lot of times they're somewhat specific, but um, I'm sure that they haven't been shown to be effective, but they do carry the imprimatur of FDA approved.
Yeah. So the kind of devices I have a little bit of expertise in, or a little bit of knowledge of, like there's a bunch of devices now that have little LED lights on them that are used to cure baldness and all kinds of different conditions for pain and for baldness. Most of those, if they say it's been evaluated for FDA, it just means that the radiation output is within the accepted standards of what what you can expose your body to. It doesn't mean it's been approved necessarily for any specific indication. Like I said, you have to be really careful with what they actually say. And I would just, in general, if it's promoted by a naturopath or a chiropractor, be very suspicious.
That's for sure.
David?
Yes.
Chris Jones had a couple questions. He asked in the chat, is Florida a haven for quacks? And he also linked to an article about an Alamogordo quack who crippled people with spinal injections of material related to plexiglass. But yeah, 80 victims. The hospital went out of business, went bankrupt.
Oh,
So
geez.
yeah,
Yeah, it does seem like Florida is a sort of a gathering place for a lot of dubious activity, I would say. I don't know if it's just they have a captive, vulnerable patient population down there with the retirees, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff that comes out of Florida that's not good.
Is Florida particularly remiss in looking at those things and kind of helping people avoid the worst?
What? How do you? Yeah.
The
It's one of
state,
those things. If something, you know, it. Well, that's one of the reasons I write these articles for like science-based medicine and the UK Skeptic, just so that there is the goal of those periodicals or those websites is to really have a source of, vetted, evidence-based, science-based information out there that's a resource that patients can find. There's so much misinformation on the internet. And it's really hard. I mean, one of the reasons I got interested in this kind of stuff was patients on a regular basis would mention something to me that they'd seen on the web or something a family member had gotten or heard about. And, I remember distinctly one of the very first ones I heard about actually was when I was in Chicago. I was at Northwestern for many years, and somebody asked me about the Santa Fe protocol. And that was one of the very first kind of quack medical things that I learned about it. It was a doctor in Santa Fe. I'm pretty sure he's retired now, but was promoting acupuncture for pretty much any eye disease there is. I don't remember what his background is. Was a chiropractor, naturopath, or maybe even a physician. But yeah, that was one of the very first that was brought to my attention. So that was sort of my entry into this interest.
Do you have any knowledge about how other countries deal with these challenges around what is allowed for patients to basically
Yeah.
experiment with?
That's a really good question. I honestly don't know. I don't think they do a whole lot better than we do. There probably are some that do better. I remember before stem cell clinics became really prevalent here, there were people traveling to Mexico for that similar types of treatments. But I don't know. There may be some more enlightened countries that do a little better job than we do, but I honestly don't know what the global solution to this has been.
Well, what makes me think of that is that I read from time to time, and I'm assuming that I'm getting accurate information, that many countries in Europe have more restrictions on what could be added to food. And so this product, I think I saw the other day, this product had 5 ingredients in Norway or somewhere like that, and here it had like 13. And that was, and I'm not saying it's accurate or not that these are bad ingredients. That's just how they restricted additives to food. Very different from our situation.
In the little bit of defense, I think a lot of people have been pretty critical of the FDA in these situations, particular for being pretty passive. It does seem like they're getting a little more aggressive with addressing some of these clinics and warning them directly rather than just kind of issuing blanket advisory statements. They do seem to be become a little more proactive in addressing some of these clinics. But the truth is their regulations really are pretty ambiguous. They use for instance, for biological material, there's 2 standards that make things exempt. One is called minimal manipulation. And so, but there's no clear guidance of what's minimal manipulation. And the other one is homologous use, meaning the tissue is used in a way that nature intended it to be used. And again, that's a pretty ambiguous concept as well. So it's pretty easy for these companies to say, well, we're minimally manipulated and this is homologous use, and so we're exempt. So until I think they get a little more stringent and clearly articulated standards, it's going to be difficult.
Well, if you watch ads for pharmaceuticals, they'll have a list of side effects, and some of them may cause death.
Yeah.
But if you watch videos or ads for natural treatments of some herb or something, they don't list any side effects, drug interactions. And I attribute that in part because they don't do anything. But the other thing is, I don't know if they have a different standard.
Well, they have a completely different standard. Those kind of, there's really no so if drugs that are approved by the FDA have to be proven safe and effective. For the supplements and stuff like that, those are considered safe until proven otherwise. So the burden is not on the companies to prove them safe. The burden is on the FDA to decide if they're unsafe. So no, the standards are completely different.
Dave, I have a comment.
Pardon me?
Dave, I have a comment.
Yeah, Austin
Sure.
has a comment.
The idea that history echoes is inappropriate. To my opinion, is that it repeats itself. I'm old enough to remember when Carbazin was the rage. It came out of Chicago from a Yugoslav doctor. It was a huge product that was passed off as a cancer treatment. Absolutely false. And the second one that came out was Laetrile. That was a few years later. That came from apricot pits, and
Right.
that disappeared. And then the final point is I met a doctor in Greece who had a cancer cure, and I was struck by how many Americans, especially from the Northwest, were flying from the state of Washington to Athens to get treated. And when I talked to them, they had been told that their physicians, their primary care physicians and the specialists had nothing more to offer them to go home and die. And I think that is totally inappropriate, but that was what drove them to seek any kind of cure that would be offered to them.
Wow.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are limits. The best, medicine is as good as it's ever been, or you could argue, but there are still limits. And some patients are determined that they are going to find, what they're looking for, and they will go to lengths to find it, even if it's false. Yes, we could probably do a better job of helping those patients in palliative ways, but that's not enough for some patients. And
So what you're talking about is once they've exhausted all possibilities, but some of them don't like the option given to them that could cure them, such as surgery that removes something or whatever. And then they try the other unproven cure, so they delay the intervention that could work, and then
Right.
it's too late.
Yeah, that's supposedly what's the story with Steve Jobs. He had what is a rare but treatable form of pancreatic cancer, is what I understand. And that he decided to forego traditional medical treatment until it was too late. And ultimately succumbed to the probably most likely treatable cancer.
Not only did he forego traditional medical care, but he did go to quacks.
Yeah, right. I don't remember exactly what the nature of his alternative treatment was, but I know I think you're correct about that.
Yeah, I think so. So I just had an eye scare, had some floaters in my vitreous humor.
Mhm.
So I went to the eye associates and got it checked out. And it is clearing up on its own. Had them for about a month. But boy, does the pictures of people injecting stuff right into your eyeball. That's scary.
Yeah. Yeah, and the truth is there's been a revolution in treatments that are medicines that are injected that in that exactly that way, that have really enabled us to treat certain forms of macular degeneration, a variety of other diseases with really effective treatments. Unfortunately, they're expensive, they're uncomfortable, they're inconvenient because they have to be injected into the eye, but they do work very well.
Well, if anybody's going to inject anything into my eye, I'm going to make sure it's proper medicine first.
Please.
Okay.
David, do you have any comments on the hype that we're seeing these days about AI being used to develop new medications?
I think, if I had a feeling that I might get asked about what the latest, um, the wave of hype that's going to promote the newest wave of quackery, and I think AI is probably one of them. And it's one of those things, as promising as AI is, there's going to be people who are going to misuse it and pretend to use it in ways that are fraudulent. I have a couple screenshots of companies that are doing that already. I didn't put them in, I actually took them out of the talk because I didn't think I'd have time. But I think AI is one of those things. I don't know exactly how it's going to play out. AI has a tremendous potential. There have been some medical uses of AI or scientific uses of AI that have been really revolutionary. When it may actually accelerate development of drugs. One of the big early AI developments was a software that could figure out protein folding in ways that took humans months and months and months to do. It could do very quickly, and that's a really important thing to be able to figure out. But I believe it will be used for a lot of quackery too.
Righty. So I have a kind of sad announcement. My wife Pam passed away last week. She was in chemotherapy for cancer that finished up in June, and she was doing well. She was in remission, but out of nowhere, this really aggressive form of leukemia crept up, and within going to the ER with some flu-like symptoms, she was gone just a few days later. So if anybody's interested, we're having a memorial November 2nd. Send me your email and we'll get you on the invite. But
My
that's been,
condolences.
yeah. Yeah, it just happened so fast. It was kind of shocking.
You start to get thinking that things are going to work out, and then things change. One of the things that I'm dealing with is not personally, but trying to get men to get their PSA number. Because my friend died from prostate cancer and I had it and I caught it early enough. And I'm surprised at how many men just refuse to learn that number. And I can't figure out why, unless they have this belief that once they have prostate cancer, their manliness is gone, is going to be gone. And so it's not worth living. So they don't want to know.
Well, that's a very long discussion, but just to let you know, there are very good reasons on both sides to either get the PSA done or to not get it done because it's not as reliable a test as most other screening tests are. But that's a very long discussion.
Sounds like a good thing maybe for a future meeting.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions to wrap up?
I don't think NMSR has any kind of a subgroup around quackery. Is that correct?
We've got quite a few people that are medical professionals that that talk to us or help with meetings. So we got Al Zelikoff. He's a physicist, MD. And Austin Meady here is an MD. And Coffee. What's his last name?
Brown.
Brown, yeah, Coffee Brown. He is a MD. We had some interesting we had an
Medicine.
interesting discussion on COVID and YouTube shut it down because they didn't get that we were talking about, yeah, you take your vaccines. Don't do ivermectin, it's not going to help you. But they took it down. We protested, but they said no. So
Well,
there
I
you
mean,
go.
some organizations have interest groups, specific
Yeah.
groups, not just members who are MDs or whatever. But I just wanted to confirm my impression that NMSR does not have a specific
We
subgroup
don't
or
really have
interest
a
group around
SIG
quackery.
or a special interest group, but we do have some medical people that participate
Right.
in meetings.
Right.
Alrighty. Okay. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. Thanks, David, for a very interesting and provocative talk.
Well,
Give
thanks
us
for the opportunity.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, and you're going to be presenting this at PsyCop
I
or
am.
PsyCon, right?
Psychon, correct.
Excellent.
Just in what, another 3 weeks or so.
Yeah, just coming right up. Well, I'm gonna try to go next year, I think. But it keeps intersecting with our a big band reunion in the fall, so it makes life hard.
So
Okay,
if
well, thanks everyone.
If anybody's going to Vegas for PsyCon, let me know. But I will be speaking on Sunday morning, giving this talk.
Excellent. Well, good luck with it. It was very
you.
interesting.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. You're welcome.
Thanks, David.
Thanks.
Okay, take care. We'll see you next time we see you. And thanks for coming, everyone.